marked 1 year since the U.S. began its withdrawal from Afghanistan, and this morning we're learning more about just how chaotic it was on the ground. Our next guest is a journalist who served in Afghanistan as a Marine and CIA officer until 2011, and last summer he worked by text message to help Afghans who worked with the U.S. escape the country as the Taliban came back to power. This video reel shows what he received from one family as they literally fled for their lives to the Kabul airport. It's all part of a brand new book entitled The Fifth Act, America's End in Afghanistan. Joining us now, the author of that book, Elliot Ackerman. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And Elise Jordan has the first question for you. Elise?
Elliot, I had friends who I tried in my very limited capacity to help flee Afghanistan during those moments of terror that still exist for so many of our Afghan friends who aren't able to leave the country. How do you think America did? What grade would you give us on how we answered our moral obligation to help those who believed in Americans and did so much to keep Americans working in Afghanistan safe over the years?
Well, I think I wouldn't necessarily give us a particularly good grade with how the withdrawal from Kabul went. I've sort of struggled at times for, what is the appropriate word, and the word I've sort of landed on is collapse. In many ways, it was a collapse of American morals and our ability to kind of adhere to our own idealistic moral standards. I think it was a collapse for many of those who've been touched by the Afghan war of time. We were sort of dragged back in trying to help our Afghan allies out. And it was a collapse of competence, not the competence of the service members at the airport who, by all accounts, were doing a heroic job under incredibly challenging circumstances, but really sort of a broader collapse of American competence over 20 years of war. Because, Afghanistan, at the end of the day, was an unequivocal defeat for the United States, and we observed that in dramatic fashion last summer.
And Elliot, do you have any sense of how the refugees who did make it out are being supported now there in the U.S.? My sense from having helped a couple is that there's not a whole lot of support from them. They're kind of brought here, they're given work permits, and then they're pretty much left on their own. And for those who came out by themselves, it's not easy to find a way to make a living, to get the kind of education you need, to get the kind of support you need. Have you got a sense of whether I guess it's the State Department or the DOD has tried to help the people who actually they did manage to get out afterwards?
Thanks so much for that question, Katty. There are absolutely, challenges. We have now thousands of Afghans who are resettling in the United States and making their lives here, and the support structures are being built, but they're not adequate right now, and that's why it's so important to support measures like the Afghan Adjustment Act, for instance, which is sort of wending its way through Congress at the moment, which would get many of these recently resettled families the work status that they need to get jobs, to apply for citizenship, and make their lives here in the United States. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we don't forget last summer. We don't forget the enduring obligations that we have to all the Afghans who are now here in America and hopefully will soon be American citizens.
All right. This is something that always has been so difficult. A debate over the past decades and years, but also how we did it is going to go down in history. The new book is The Fifth Act, America's End in Afghanistan. Elliot Ackerman, thank you very much for writing this book. We appreciate it. We appreciate your reporting. And just ahead, the